Hello, friends. It is I, Samuel. So yesterday, Kemi Badenoch, one of the two contenders for leadership of the Conservative Party, said some interesting things about autism in her pamphlet Conservatism in Crisis, which made me the slightest bit mad. And by the slightest bit mad, I mean kind of furious. Let's have a look, shall we? She says, being diagnosed as neurodiverse was once seen as helpful, as it meant you could understand your own brain, and so help you to deal with the world. It was an individual focus change. But now it offers economic advantages and protections. If you have a neurodiversity diagnosis, e.g. anxiety and autism, then it is usually seen as a disability, a category similar to race or biological sex in terms of discrimination law and general attitudes. Well done. Well done. You have a bachelor's degree in law and you understand the Human Rights Act. Well done. So, if you are a child, you may well get better treatment or equipment at school, even transport to and from home. If you are in the workforce, you are protected in employment terms from day one. You can more easily claim for unfair dismissal, and under disability rules, you can require your employer to make reasonable adjustments to your job, and you can reveal your disability once you have been employed rather than before. Again, the Equality Act 2010. Well done. In short, whereas psychological and mental health was seen as something that people should work on themselves as individuals, mental health has become something that society, schools and employers have to adapt around. Now, the purpose of this video is to show you why, in my personal opinion, she's talking out of her arse. Let's start with the so-called economic benefits of autism. The government's autism strategy has shown that autistic people are less employed than other disabled people, and by extension, non-disabled people. In December 2020, 22% of autistic people between the ages of 16 and 64 were in employment, in contrast to 52% of disabled people and 81% of non-disabled people. And the government's suggestions for the reasons for this is that recruitment processes were not autism friendly, and there was difficulty accessing support in work. At the time, the government recognised methods designed to help with unemployment, like job centres, do not understand the needs of autistic people and all the adaptations that may be required, and that assessment processes for access to the welfare system could also be more difficult for autistic people. The more recent Buckland review of autistic employment that was released in February this year by the former chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Autism, Robert Buckland, showed that employment figures outside of the pandemic are only marginally better, with 3 in 10 people employed, still far below other disabled groups and miles behind non-autistic people. Autistic graduates like me are twice as likely to be unemployed after 15 months of uni as non-disabled graduates, with only 36% of autistic graduates finding full-time work in this period, and that autistic graduates, and I'm quoting here, are most likely to be overqualified for the job they have, and most likely to be on 0 hours contracts, and least likely to be in a permanent role. And that this is partly the fault of the job application process being designed to filter neurodivergent people out through various methods such as psychometric tests and job descriptions that are vague, and interview questions which are ambiguous. And that employers emphasize social skills over the ability to do the job. And let me tell you, this is 100% correct. It's really a problem that I have difficulty with. The report acknowledges that autistic people have a well-founded fear of discrimination and so often don't declare autism, and those that do declare only had a positive impact of declaring 4 out of 10 times, and a quarter of reasonable adjustments asked for were refused by employers. So far, it's looking that Kemi Badenoch hasn't done the research very well. The Buckland Review also made it very clear that autistic people have the largest pay gap of all disabled groups when compared to non-disabled people. The figures from the Office of National Statistics show that autistic people have a median pay which is 33.5% less than non-disabled employees. For context, the Office of National Statistics stats on the gender pay gap in the UK in 2023 showed that women in full-time work earned 7.7% less than men and 14.3% less in part-time work. And the ONS 2023 report on the difference in pay between different ethnic groups found that black people earned 5.6% less than white people in Britain on average. These atrocious employment figures obviously affect other areas like housing, where 75% of autistic people live with their parents compared to 16% of disabled people generally. Autistic people are less able to be independent because they cannot get jobs that they're able to do, and the jobs they do get, on average, pay less. The autism strategy was written by a government in which Kemi Badenoch was the Minister for Women and Equalities for 2 years. You would expect that both the autism strategy and the Buckland review would have passed her desk, and that certainly as part of collective responsibility, it was her job to implement these recommendations. The idea that having autism gives you economic benefits like secure employment is made even more laughable by my own situation, where I cannot get a job in the army because they have imposed a blanket ban on employment. The army is making this problem worse. If discrimination based on neurodiversity is practiced in the public sector, you can be certain that it is practiced in the private sector. If you consider the tone of what Badenoch is saying, she is suggesting that society shouldn't accommodate neurodiverse people, that it should be easier to fire us, that we should do less well in school, and that we shouldn't have the protections for disability if we didn't declare in the recruitment process, which is absurd when you consider how underdiagnosed autism is. And I highly doubt that she would recommend that wheelchair users or blind people can only request reasonable adjustments if they've had these issues before they've applied. It seems to me that she's pretty much admitting that she wouldn't hire autistic people if she knew they were autistic, or at least that others should have the right to be so discriminating. The idea that school is easier for autistic children is generally insulting, but especially strange considering over the last few months there have been a number of stories coming from schools that specialise in learning difficulties of autistic and other children with learning difficulties being abused by staff, including an incident with a non-verbal autistic child being attacked by their teaching assistants. Looking further afield in Britain, autistic education in France is horrifically bad. In 2014, the Council of Europe, the ECHR, condemned France unanimously for violating the right of children and adolescents with autism to be educated in mainstream schools, as while 87% of autistic children attended primary school, only 1.2% attended upper secondary school, so year 10 to year 13. The council also found that at specialist institutions that autistic children were being sent to, they were not actually educational. And in fact, the council ruled that families have no other choice than to leave France to get an education for their child. It's almost impossible to get an education in France if you're autistic. So where exactly is the benefit of being autistic, Miss Badenoch? Badenoch, clearly, despite being in charge of tackling inequality in Britain for 2 years, has a poor understanding of autism. As Robert Buckland pointed out after the Conservatism in Crisis report was released, anxiety is not neurodiversity and autism is not a mental health condition, and up to 700,000 autistic people are economically inactive, in his words, because there are just too many barriers to work. So now that we've established what she said is bullshit, let's think about why she said it. There seems to be an element of conservative politics which likes to use how misunderstood autism is to make whatever point they like. For instance, transphobic people have used the stigmatization of autism to advance their argument, painting us as both simultaneously scapegoats and as vulnerable victims, which is what J.K. Rowling did when she infamously tried to deny the existence of trans people, trans men in particular, by implying that trans men are just confused autistic girls, undermining the agency of autistic people and infantilizing them in order to delegitimize trans people. This strategy in right-wing circles has turned into very real laws, which disqualify autistic people from receiving gender-affirming care in a number of US states like Georgia, as part of larger measures which limit medical access for trans people, arguing that autistic people as adults cannot know what's best for themselves. Actually, Badenoch kind of does this as well. In the part where she seems to suggest that neurodiversity shouldn't be a protected category, she emphasizes biological sex over gender as a category more worthy of respect. In this section of Conservatism in Crisis, Badenoch is using autism in a similar way as a crude and inaccurate tool to attack a society that is just beginning to give proper consideration to mental health and introducing flexibility into work and education. She argues that mental health shouldn't be considered to be disabling, and if anyone is struggling with mental health, it's their own problem, and society as a collective should be under no obligation to help. Any harm done to our collective understanding of neurodiversity is simply collateral damage to her. So, we have established that autistic people do not have economic benefits to being autistic. Thank you very much. And we'll be looking at this again another time. I hope I have been informative, and I will see you again soon, guys. Thank